Montana Territory, 1885. The wind swept across the prairie with a lonesome howl that matched the emptiness Xavier Ellis felt in his heart. At 24, he'd already seen enough violence and disappointment to last several lifetimes. The harsh frontier had taught him one undeniable lesson. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Not when survival demanded every ounce of vigilance. Xavier adjusted his Stetson as he rode toward the small settlement of Whispering Creek, his lean frame silhouetted against the golden sunset. His ranch, modest but growing steadily, lay 5 miles outside town, far enough to keep his distance from people and their complications. The cattle drive had been successful, but now he needed supplies before winter set in. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and enough land to breathe, he often told himself. It was the creed that had kept him alive since his parents' farm burned when he was 16. The frontier was merciless to the soft-hearted. He'd witnessed too many good men die protecting loved ones to risk such vulnerability. As Xavier tethered his horse outside the general store, he noticed an unfamiliar wagon parked nearby. New faces were rare in Whispering Creek. He touched the revolver at his hip instinctively, another habit that had served him well. Trust came with too high a price in the West. Inside the store, conversations hushed momentarily as he entered, then resumed. Xavier nodded curtly to Sheriff Daniels before approaching the counter. As he waited for Mr. Peterson to finish with another customer, his attention was drawn to a young woman selecting books from a shelf in the corner. She stood with graceful posture, her chestnut brown hair cascading down her back in neat waves. Her blue calico dress was modest but unmistakably Eastern in its styling. Something about her demeanor, confidence mingled with gentleness, made Xavier pause. She couldn't have been more than 22. "That's Miss Madeline Montgomery," Mr. Peterson said, following Xavier's gaze. "Our new schoolteacher. Arrived on yesterday's stage from Boston. Mayor Thompson finally convinced the county to send us someone educated." Xavier merely nodded, turning his attention back to his supply list. Schools and teachers had no bearing on his life. "Just the usual, Mr. Peterson. And extra ammunition this month." As Mr. Peterson gathered his order, Xavier felt someone approach. He turned to find the schoolteacher standing beside him, a polite smile illuminating her face. "Pardon me," she said, her voice carrying a refined Eastern accent. "I understand you might be Mr. Ellis? The mayor mentioned your ranch is near where the schoolhouse stands." Xavier stiffened. "That's right. I'm Madeline Montgomery." She extended her hand with a directness uncommon for ladies. "I was hoping to inquire about the condition of the schoolhouse. No one has been able to take me there yet, and classes begin next week." Reluctantly, Xavier shook her hand. "It's abandoned. Been that way 3 years since the last teacher left. Probably needs work." "I see." Her hazel eyes, intelligent and unwavering, assessed him. "Would it be possible for you to show me tomorrow? I understand it's an imposition, but as neighbors of sorts." Xavier wanted to refuse. Getting involved with town matters, especially with a refined Eastern woman who clearly wouldn't last a winter, was exactly the kind of entanglement he avoided. But something in her determined gaze made saying no difficult. "I'll be by at noon," he said curtly, gathering his supplies. "Don't expect much from that schoolhouse." Her smile brightened. "Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I'll be ready." As Xavier rode home, he chastised himself for agreeing. People like Madeline Montgomery represented everything he distrusted, Eastern idealism that crumbled under Western realities. She'd be gone by Christmas, fleeing back to civilization like all the others. Attachment to anyone, especially someone so obviously temporary, was a fool's gamble. What Xavier didn't know was that Madeline Montgomery carried her own secrets, ones that would soon challenge everything he believed about survival on the frontier. The following day, Xavier arrived at the mayor's house precisely at noon. Madeline emerged wearing a practical riding skirt and jacket, her chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. She carried a notebook and seemed prepared for the journey, surprising Xavier, who had half expected her to change her mind. "Thank you for your punctuality, Mr. Ellis," she said, accepting his help onto his wagon with practiced ease. As they traveled, Xavier noticed she didn't chatter nervously like most Eastern women he'd encountered. Instead, she observed the landscape with quiet appreciation. "Have you taught before, Miss Montgomery?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, In Boston for 2 years, she replied. But I've always wanted to teach on the frontier. Education is even more vital here than in the East. Xavier couldn't help his skepticism. Most folks here are more concerned with survival than books. Education is survival, Mr. Ellis, she countered, her voice gentle but firm. Knowledge of agriculture, mathematics for trade, literacy for legal matters. These things determine who thrives and who merely survives. Her words carried conviction that caught Xavier off guard. When they reached the abandoned schoolhouse, reality confronted idealism. The small wooden structure stood weathered and neglected, with a sagging porch and broken windows. Xavier watched Madeline's face, expecting disappointment or dismay. Instead, she approached the building with determined steps. It has good bones, she said, examining the structure. The roof seems sound in most places. With some repairs, it could be quite serviceable. You won't find many volunteers, Xavier warned. Ranching season's busy and winter's coming. Madeline turned to him, sunlight catching the determination in her hazel eyes. Then I'll do it myself. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Ellis. To his surprise, she rolled up her sleeves and began clearing debris from the entrance. Xavier found himself reluctantly dismounting to help. As they worked side by side clearing the schoolhouse, Xavier glimpsed something unexpected. Madeline's hands were calloused, not soft as he'd expected from an Eastern lady. You've done physical work before, he observed. A shadow crossed her face. Yes, life hasn't always been schoolbooks and Boston parlors. Before he could inquire further, a rattlesnake slithered from beneath a fallen shelf. Madeline froze as the snake coiled, preparing to strike. Xavier moved with instinctive speed, pulling her behind him while drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. The shot echoed through the empty schoolhouse. As the dust settled, Madeline steadied herself against him, her composure returning quickly. Thank you, she said, stepping away. That was impressively quick reflexes. Frontier lesson number 1, Xavier replied, holstering his weapon. Always be aware of your surroundings. I'll remember that, she nodded, returning to work as if nothing had happened. By late afternoon, they had cleared enough debris to assess what repairs were needed. Xavier found himself offering more help than he'd intended. I can bring lumber from town tomorrow, he said, and tools to fix those windows. Madeline studied him curiously. That's very kind, but I thought you were just showing me the place. Xavier couldn't explain his actions to himself, let alone to her. Can't have children learning in a hazardous building. It's just being neighborly. Over the following week, Xavier found reasons to help with the schoolhouse repairs. He told himself it was practical. The sooner the school was ready, the sooner he could return to his solitary routine. But watching Madeline work with tireless determination stirred something he'd long suppressed. One evening as sunset painted the prairie gold, Xavier was finishing the schoolhouse roof while Madeline organized books below. He paused, watching her through the newly repaired window. She moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to read passages that made her smile. When he climbed down, she offered him water from her canteen. You've been more helpful than the entire town, Mr. Ellis. Xavier, he corrected, surprising himself. If we're going to rebuild a schoolhouse together, you might as well use my name. Xavier, she repeated, smiling. Then you must call me Madeline. As they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the sunset, Xavier found himself asking, what brought you to Montana territory, Madeline? Boston must seem like another world compared to this. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with her skirt. I wanted a fresh start. Sometimes the past becomes too heavy to carry in familiar surroundings. The words resonated with Xavier, though he didn't press further. They sat in companionable silence until twilight deepened into dusk. I should get you back to town, he finally said, helping her into his wagon. Under the star-filled sky, Xavier felt an unfamiliar restlessness. This woman was becoming more than just the schoolteacher. She was becoming someone whose presence he anticipated, whose opinions he valued. It was dangerous territory for a man who'd built his life around independence. As the schoolhouse neared completion, Xavier noticed Madeline growing inexplicably tense whenever riders passed through from the east. Once, at the sound of approaching horses, he caught her paling visibly before composing herself. Are you expecting someone? He asked casually. No, she answered too quickly. Just still adjusting to frontier life. But Xavier recognized the vigilance in her eyes. It mirrored his own whenever danger approached. Madeline Montgomery was hiding something, and whatever it was, it frightened her. The school's opening day arrived with unexpected fanfare. Families from miles around brought their children, curious about the educated Eastern teacher who'd restored the schoolhouse. Xavier watched from a distance as Madeline welcomed each child with genuine warmth. Sheriff Daniels sidled up beside him. Quite a change, her coming here. Never thought I'd see you helping with the schoolhouse. Just being neighborly, Xavier replied. Uh-huh, the sheriff said knowingly. Neighborly enough that you've been in town more in 3 weeks than the past 3 years. Xavier didn't respond, but inside he acknowledged the truth. Somehow, Madeline had breached the careful walls he'd built. Her determination, intelligence, and the mystery she carried made him question his belief that attachment was weakness. When she smiled at him across the schoolyard, something long dormant stirred in his chest. That evening, Xavier waited until the celebrations ended, then approached Madeline as she locked the schoolhouse. I have something for you, he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a brass bell for the schoolhouse. It's beautiful, she whispered, running her fingers over the polished metal. Every proper school needs a bell, Xavier said, suddenly self-conscious. Madeline's eyes glistened in the fading light. Thank you for believing in this place when no one else did. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Xavier forgot all his rules about keeping his distance. He was about to speak when hoofbeats approached from the main road. Madeline tensed immediately, her hand gripping his arm. I should go inside, she said, her voice tight with fear. What's wrong? Xavier asked, instinctively moving between her and the approaching riders. Nothing, she insisted, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Please, just leave before they see you with me. But it was too late. 3 riders appeared, dusty from the trail. Their leader, a hard-faced man in an expensive suit, smiled coldly when he spotted Madeline. Well, if it isn't the lovely widow, he called out. Did you think Boston was the only place with telegraphs, Mrs. Harrigan? Xavier felt Madeline stiffen beside him. Harrigan? He questioned, turning to her. Her name isn't Montgomery, the man said, dismounting. Is it Caroline? Or perhaps another alias entirely? Madeline's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. My name is Madeline Montgomery. You have mistaken me for someone else, Mr. Reeves. No mistake, Reeves said, approaching them. You're the widow of Thomas Harrigan, and you disappeared with something valuable that belongs to me. Xavier's hand hovered near his gun. This lady is our schoolteacher. You're not welcome here. Reeves assessed Xavier with calculating eyes. She spun quite a tale for you, hasn't she? This woman is a thief and a liar. She stole documents from my company after her husband's unfortunate accident. It wasn't an accident, Madeline said, her voice suddenly steel. Thomas discovered your mining company was defrauding investors. You had him killed. The accusation hung in the air. Xavier looked between them, uncertain what to believe but unwilling to abandon Madeline. I have papers proving Thomas's murder and your schemes, Madeline continued. They're hidden where you'll never find them. Reeves's false politeness vanished. You have until tomorrow to produce those papers, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman their schoolteacher truly is. With that threat, he and his men departed, leaving Xavier and Madeline alone in the gathering darkness. Is it true? Xavier asked quietly. About your name? Madeline's shoulders slumped. My name is Madeline. Montgomery was my maiden name. I was married to Thomas Harrigan until his murder last year. As they walked slowly toward town, Madeline revealed her story. Her husband had been an accountant for Reeves Mining Company who discovered evidence of massive fraud. The night he planned to take his findings to authorities, he was killed in a staged accident. Madeline had escaped with the incriminating documents, changing her name and fleeing west. I thought Montana was far enough, she said, wiping away a tear. I wanted to start over where no one knew me. Teaching was my passion before I married Thomas. Xavier struggled with conflicting emotions, betrayal at her deception, admiration for her courage, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Those documents, he finally asked. Where are they? Hidden in a compartment beneath my desk at the schoolhouse, she admitted. I couldn't leave them behind, but I never intended to bring danger here. Xavier was silent for a long moment. You should have told me. And risk involving you? You've made it clear you prefer solitude to complications, Madeline replied. Besides, How could I trust anyone after what happened to Thomas? Her words struck home. Xavier had built his life around the same protective isolation. How could he fault her for adopting the very philosophy he lived by? What will you do now, he asked. What I should have done in Boston. Take the documents to federal authorities. There's a marshal in Helena who can help. Xavier walked her to the mayor's house, his mind churning. Everything in him warned against getting involved in her dangerous past. Yet the thought of her facing Reeves alone was unbearable. Pack what you need, he said finally. I'll come for you before dawn. We'll retrieve the documents and leave for Helena immediately. Hope flickered in her eyes. Why would you risk yourself for me? Xavier couldn't articulate the transformation happening within him. Because no one should face injustice alone, he said simply. Before sunrise, Xavier waited in the shadows near the mayor's house. When Madeline emerged with a small bag, they moved silently through the sleeping town toward the schoolhouse. Reeves will be watching, Xavier warned as they approached. There's another way in, Madeline whispered, leading him behind the building to a small window. Once inside, Madeline worked quickly, removing a floorboard beneath her desk to reveal a leather portfolio. Everything is here. Ledgers showing embezzlement, correspondence about bribing officials, and evidence linking Reeves to Thomas's death. As she secured the documents, a floorboard creaked near the door. Xavier drew his revolver, just as Reeves and his men burst in. How touching, Reeves sneered. The cowboy and the widow, playing detective. Step back, Xavier commanded, positioning himself before Madeline. Reeves laughed. In case you haven't noticed, we outnumber you. Now hand over those papers before someone else dies tragically. Like Thomas Harrigan? Xavier challenged. Accidents happen to those who meddle in business beyond their understanding, Reeves said coldly. Xavier felt Madeline press something into his hand, the portfolio. Run, she whispered. Get these to the marshal. Before Xavier could respond, Madeline knocked over a lantern. Oil spilled across the floor, igniting instantly. In the chaos, she pushed Xavier toward the window. Go, she cried as flames spread between them and Reeves's men. Instead, Xavier grabbed her hand, pulling her with him through the window as gunshots rang out behind them. They ran for his horse tethered nearby, mounting quickly as the schoolhouse became engulfed in flames. We need to reach Helena, Madeline gasped as they galloped away. It's our only chance. They rode hard through the day, taking back trails to avoid pursuit. By nightfall, they were deep in the mountains, forced to make camp in a secluded ravine. As they huddled near a small fire, Xavier finally asked the question burning within him. Why did you come to Whispering Creek of all places? Why risk starting over so close to my ranch? Madeline looked away. It wasn't coincidence, she admitted. I chose it because of you. Xavier stared at her in confusion. Before I fled Boston, I researched possible hideaways, she explained. I found an article about a young rancher who single-handedly fought off rustlers to save his neighbor's family. It mentioned your name and Whispering Creek. That was 3 years ago, Xavier said, remembering the incident. I thought a place with someone like you, someone brave enough to help strangers, might be safe. Her voice softened. I never intended to draw you into my troubles. The revelation stunned Xavier. For years, he believed isolation was strength, that connections were vulnerabilities. Yet Madeline had sought him out precisely because of a moment when he'd risked himself for others. We should rest, he said finally. Tomorrow will be demanding. As night deepened, Xavier kept watch while Madeline slept. Looking at her in the firelight, he confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. His feelings for her had grown beyond concern or obligation. She had awakened something he thought long buried, the capacity to care deeply, to connect despite the risks. The realization terrified him. What if he couldn't protect her? What if opening his heart meant losing everything, as he'd seen happen to so many others on the frontier? Near dawn, hoofbeats approaching their camp confirmed his fears. Reeves had found them. Madeline, wake up, Xavier whispered urgently. They're here. They doused the fire and retreated deeper into the ravine, but the narrow path left them trapped. As Reeves and his men closed in, Xavier made a decision. Take the horse and the documents, he told Madeline. I'll hold them off while you escape to Helena. No, she refused, gripping his arm. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my fight. It's not just your fight anymore, Xavier said. The words came from a place he'd kept guarded for years. Madeline, you've shown me that isolation isn't strength. It's just fear wearing a different mask. I've been hiding from connection because I was afraid of loss. Gunfire interrupted them as bullets ricocheted off nearby rocks. We know you're there, Reeves called out. There's nowhere left to run. Xavier assessed their situation. The ravine offered one possible escape route, a narrow path along the cliff face that might lead to the valley below. It was dangerous, but their only hope. Follow the ledge, he instructed Madeline. I'll be right behind you. As she moved carefully along the precipice, Xavier provided covering fire, forcing Reeves and his men to take cover. When Madeline reached a relatively safe position, Xavier began his own retreat. He was halfway across when a bullet struck the rock near his hand, causing him to lose his grip. He slipped, catching himself on a narrow ledge 20 feet below. Xavier! Madeline cried out. Keep going, he shouted, struggling to find handholds in the crumbling rock face. Above, Reeves peered over the edge, aiming his pistol at Xavier's vulnerable position. Looks like you've reached the end of your trail, Cowboy. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Reeves's gun. The businessman jerked backward, clutching his shoulder. Sheriff Daniels stood behind him, revolver drawn, with several deputies flanking him. Throw down your weapons, the sheriff commanded Reeves's men. You're trespassing in my county. With help from the deputies, Xavier was pulled to safety. Madeline rushed to him, embracing him with desperate relief. How did you find us? Xavier asked the sheriff. Telegraph from Boston, Daniels explained. Federal authorities have been looking for Mr. Reeves here. Seems his mining company's collapse caused quite a scandal. When I heard about your midnight departure with our schoolteacher, I figured it might be connected. As Reeves and his men were taken into custody, Xavier turned to Madeline. I thought I was going to lose you, he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. I thought the same, she whispered, her hands trembling as they touched his face. All my life I've been running or hiding. First from an unhappy home to a hasty marriage, then from danger after Thomas died. I never expected to find someone worth staying for. Xavier took her hands in his. I spent years believing that caring for others was a weakness the frontier would exploit. But these past weeks with you showed me I was wrong. Loving someone doesn't make you vulnerable. It gives you something worth fighting for. Their journey to Helena confirmed what they already knew in their hearts. Federal marshals received Madeline's evidence eagerly, assuring her that Reeves would face justice for Thomas's murder and his financial crimes. Her testimony would be needed eventually, but for now, she was free to build a new life, one of her choosing. 1 year later, Xavier stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching a new schoolhouse being raised near the property. The original had been rebuilt in town after the fire, but this smaller one would serve the children of outlying farms. Is the desk positioned correctly? Madeline called from inside. Xavier smiled as he entered to find his wife arranging the small classroom. Her chestnut hair was loosely braided, and her simple blue dress showed the gentle curve of early pregnancy. Perfect, he answered, embracing her from behind. Though I still think teaching half the week here and half in town is too much in your condition. Madeline turned in his arms. Nonsense. Both schools need attention, and I've never been happier. The changes in their lives had come swiftly after returning from Helena. Xavier had proposed within a month, unable to imagine returning to his solitary existence. They'd married in the spring, with the entire town celebrating the union of their beloved schoolteacher and the once reclusive rancher. Xavier's ranch had flourished with Madeline's practical mind complementing his ranching skills. They'd expanded their herd and hired 2 hands to help manage the growing operation. More importantly, they'd opened their home and hearts to the community Madeline loved and Xavier had rediscovered. Sheriff Daniels brought news yesterday, Xavier said. Reeves was sentenced to 20 years. His conviction made the Eastern papers. Madeline nodded, a bittersweet smile crossing her face. Thomas would be pleased with justice, but I think he'd be even happier knowing I found peace. And love, Xavier added softly. Yes, she agreed, resting her head against his chest. The kind of love worth crossing a continent for. As evening fell across the prairie, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the vast Montana sky. Xavier reflected on the transformation in his life, from a man who believed love was a frontier liability to one who understood it was the greatest frontier strength. Madeline leaned against him, her hand resting on her growing belly. I was thinking Alexander for a boy, After your father, she suggested. Or Clara for a girl, after my grandmother. Xavier smiled, covering her hand with his. Either sounds perfect for the next chapter of our story. The wind still swept across the prairie with its lonesome howl, but Xavier Ellis no longer felt empty inside. The harsh frontier that had once taught him to avoid attachment had ultimately revealed its greatest lesson. True survival wasn't found in isolation, but in the courage to build a life worth sharing. As darkness settled over their home, Xavier held Madeline close, grateful for the schoolteacher whose secret had broken through his defenses and taught his heart to trust again in the wild promise of love on the Montana frontier.